Good morning. How is everyone? I hope you all had a good spring break, such as it was. I will be getting in touch with everybody on a variety of issues, responding to personal emails. But what I'd like to, and I hope everyone is doing as well as they can under the circumstances, and that everybody's got some support, some family, some friends to help them out in this unusual and potentially difficult time. So what I'd like to do today is to just talk very briefly about the midterm exam. As I've said, the midterm exam format is identical to quiz number 2, the essay questions. And it is simply a longer version, a more involved version of the style, the format of quiz number 2. So what I'm going to do in just a moment is to turn to Blackboard to just look at the infrastructure for the midterm to make it really patently clear to everyone what's involved, and then we'll get into the questions on the exam itself. And I'm also going to make a point of pointing out some things that it's kind of things that students always on the whole failed to take into consideration, and just some general feedback from quiz number 2 on the kinds of things you need to do to really excel on this exam, right? So let us turn to the exam. So here we are in Blackboard, right? This is my 9:30 class, but the format is set up the same for each class, so it's absolutely identical. First of all, you'll notice over here back to assignments, and you've probably already long seen the midterm exam. And I've just added that it's indicated within the content, but I've just put it on here, due Sunday, April 19 at 11:59. A few students have emailed me still about issues, just individuals about being behind on work and things of that sort. I will be responding, and let me just make a general comment that our goal here is really just to accommodate the situation and still learn the things that we need to learn for the course. And so due dates for the assignments, I'm happy to be accommodating. The exam, unless there's an exceptional circumstance, must be in by Sunday, April 19 at 11:59, right, the end of the day. If you have a very special circumstance, you must email me in advance to let me know what your situation is and the time you need to complete it. Otherwise, if you have not done that by the time, and you turn it in late, it's going to be marked late and you're going to get points off for that. That said, in general, going into the rest of the semester, we all have issues. We all are trying to accommodate this situation as best we can. And I'm going to be flexible in general on deadlines. However, the problem really is, even in a semester like this, and maybe more so, I can't speak to each student's particular situation, but if you let things go, of course they're going to build up and get backlogged at the end. And of course, whenever you're backlogged with a lot of work, it just becomes more and more daunting. And then, of course, the quality of your work goes down. So staying on top of things in an online environment is absolutely crucial. That's something I mentioned when I did first video. Okay, so let's just go through this now. So here we have the midterm exam, right? And we're going to click on it. Let's hope everything works. And so here is the Word document, just like the format for this quiz number 2, that I will open in a moment, where it will include general instructions on what, including basically what you're being graded on, what are the expectations for the exam, and then the questions themselves. So I'm going to go again through both the instructions and the questions themselves and try to clarify them. And of course, if you have any questions, please feel free to email me on that. But what I'm going to do first is actually look at the turn it in function. I suppose most of you have used this function before, but I assume some of you probably haven't. The turn it in function is basically a kind of a cloud type system where you upload your exam, and basically it's uploading it to me, and it's kind of like you're just uploading it to Blackboard itself, but turn it in is actually a separate function but Blackboard hosts Turnitin, right? So what we're going to do here is not going to click on this, but we're going to, I suppose you're seeing the same. I'll turn off edit mode here. That's my special snazzy teacher mode. And I suppose yours looks just like this. It says view and complete. So you're going to click on that. And then voila, Turnitin, right? And it says submit single file upload. And that's exactly what you're going to do. So this is, as far as I can tell, it's going to be the same on your end. And it's really quite simple. You click on this toggle and you can scroll to find your names, right? Then you type your name first and last here. Here you can just say, let's just do it now. You'll do LEH 353 midterm. I can't spell right now until I get going here. And then you can just put your 9:30 class time, whatever it happens to be, right? As just to identify more clearly. Then you just scroll down a little more and you can upload right from your computer, right? Let's just be clear. It needs to be in a Word document, an ordinary Word document. That's the only thing I'm going to accept. In some instances, you know, PDFs have all kinds of advantages, but for my purposes here, I need a Word document. So please make sure it's in that format. Other than that, you submit it by the deadline, and what the system does is generate a confirmation that you've submitted it, and it also gives the time and the date and time. So that's all kind of pretty straightforward, right? And it's no different from kind of uploading to Google Docs or any other type of upload. Okay, so let's go back here and then look at the exam itself. So then the exam itself, we'll click on this, and here it opens up. Okay, so here's the midterm. And what I'd like to do is go through the instructions. And let me first say this. As you do the exam, and this will be the same for the final, please just leave the instructions there as you work. And in the final version of the exam that you're going to submit, please leave the questions in all at the beginning prior to the answer. And I'll give you a couple notes, because yes, you can create an outline with those questions as they're broken up into their component parts as you answer them. But then when you've finished your essay, the only location for the question should be at the top above your answer all together. And I'll just repeat, why am I asking you to leave this all in? Because it allows you to refer back to it as you write. You know, there's two aspects of the writing here. You have to hear the questions, here's what I'm asking, then you have to go and think about the questions and try to answer them, but then those answers have to conform to the expectations of the directions. And this is kind of simple baby step type thing, but it really helps to just leave it there, because there's always some aspect of it that you forget that you need to follow. And, you know, most of these instructions are substantive. They're not just there as busy work, or they're not just there for simply formatting concerns. They're also there because this is part of the nature of the assignment itself, and not just kind of a pro forma thing. Okay, so it's due Sunday on the 19th. Again, if you have some kind of serious issue going on, please make sure to email me in advance. And by that I mean, like, not at 11:58, right? Email me ideally prior to Sunday. Some simple things, please 12 font, please 1.5 spaced. Obviously, it's not going to be stapled. Don't play games with the font. Don't make it bigger. Don't make it smaller. Part of the assignment is answering these questions in 2 pages, right? There's 2 questions, and each requires a 2-page answer for a total of 4 pages. So you should have 4 pages of written answer. When I say 4 pages, I don't mean including the question, and I don't mean including just kind of doing funky things with formatting or a lot of empty space. That's 4 pages of writing, right? As part of your assignment, there's 2 basic parts to the assignment. And the first part is just the proper format and the proper writing. And of course, issues of proper writing and format and structure lead into questions of substance as well. But obviously, you're writing in sentence paragraph form. You're given a question and then you're forced to give an answer. And that initial understanding of what you think, if I say from Aristotle, what is Aristotle's meaning of happiness? You give one sentence that clarifies what does Aristotle understand by the concept of happiness? And then you support that. That becomes a thesis that then gets supported, right? So you're answering only in sentence paragraph form. A sentence is a single thought. A paragraph is a set of thoughts, aka sentences, that sit together in a kind of uniform theme under a thematic structure. And then when the theme changes, when the topic changes, your paragraph should change, right? So paragraphs are not just, oh, I've written 5 sentences, I now need to start a new paragraph. Although there's some rationale for breaking paragraphs up because it gets the reader moving along at a certain pace. So that's another kind of issue. But primarily for our purposes, the paragraph connotes a certain theme or topic that's being discussed, and that the sentences represent hitting the vital elements of that topic and also in a logical order. So we get to number 10 here, which is proofreading for speller, grammar, meaning, and intelligibility. Focus on the question and its scope and the logical flow of ideas from one point to the next, one sentence to next. So since I've been talking about paragraph form, let me talk about the last things. You start with a thesis, you establish your claim, and then you support it with substance, with detail, with evidence coming from the text, right? So remember, you should not be using any secondary sources outside of what I have given you. And just as a reminder, turning it in naturally does like a scan of the internet based on the language. It scans the language in your document and then searches for it. And if it matches up with anything, that becomes very apparent. I'm pretty good at doing that myself because I've done this enough to kind of pick up on that. But the real point is the answers for your questions come from the book and come from your own thinking and analysis, comprehension of the book. I am testing your understanding of these concepts. I am not testing whether you can, create a research paper where you synthesize secondary literature. That is a perfectly valid type of assignment, but that is not what's being asked here. So you should not be using any secondary sources whatsoever. So to come back to the structure of the paragraph, you present a thesis claim about what you're claiming, and then that is backed up by 2 things. It's backed up by evidence from the text, and it's backed up by analysis of the text, inferences, analytical conclusions you reached from what Aristotle is saying. And of course, this is particularly pertinent to Aristotle, as we've seen, because when he explicitly does not reveal his full meaning in one place, he's, for better and worse, he does not give you that thesis statement that clearly tells you what his point of view is. You have to work for it to some extent. And we've spent a lot of time in these lectures, video lectures, reading the text aloud and really seeing how it all connects up in the big picture. Okay, so proofreading is not really about spelling and grammar. Maybe grammar to the extent of how do I say something as clearly as possible? I know what I want to say, but when I reread this, when I proofread it, it's not getting the clarity of meaning that I have in my head. And how can I do that? My basic thesis about all writing is if you cannot write clearly, it is because singularly you do not have a clear, coherent thought. And sadly, I discover all the time in my own writing that I do not have a clear and coherent thought. I'm onto something, but honestly, I realize at some point I haven't really clarified what I'm saying because I haven't thought it through. And clear thoughts clear writing comes from clear thinking. And grammar, apart from just correct grammar, grammar plays a big role in structuring a sentence in a way that illuminates what you're trying to say as directly as possible to the reader. And in an exam like this, that's really your goal. So that's connected, obviously, with everything you say having meaning and intelligibility. I mean, so for example, if no hint here, if you say that Aristotle's definition of happiness is activity in accord with virtue, right? Activity in accord with virtue. That's rather abstract, and I don't think any of you really speak that way. If you were to even understand from your own point of perspective as an individual, how would you put that in language that makes it transparent and clear exactly what he means by that? Okay, and then of course the logical flow of ideas. Boy, I can't go into it too much right now because I'd be giving too much away, but if you take, for example, Aristotle's Ethics and the way it's laid out, we looked at its outline. We established very clearly that there is a very crystalline flow of ideas from the initial idea of dealing with happiness to subsequent ideas that lead up to friendship and then return to happiness, right? I tried to impress upon everyone that what you're really seeing there is not just a kind of guy who's going through the motions to get all the ideas out, but that order has a specific meaning precisely in terms of the flow of ideas and in terms of the way they're connected and the way one causes or influences the next, right? Number 11, this is really important. You must cite relevant passages. I would say one weakness in general, and I'd say to some extent on quiz number 2 on the whole, was the issue of properly citing, by which I just mean citing from the text sufficiently. And obviously it can be paraphrased or it can be quoted directly. And in either situation, you need to just give me the page number here in a parenthetical notation. Very, very simple. Since we know what text is being referred to, we don't need to do anything more than that. It's just kind of shorthand for us here. And the key thing is your answers need to be close to the text. What do I mean by that? So the first question deals with happiness. We don't need 5 sentences at the outset. Oh, happiness has always been considered a great theme of human life. And, people in the 20th century think about it this way, and Freud thought about it that way, and Carl Jung thought about it this way, and it's just these kind of general framing remarks that, kind of, they really don't serve to get at the directness and closeness of, yes, we're dealing with happiness, but those remarks aren't close enough to what Aristotle actually says. And by close, I mean a precision and accuracy about what's actually being said in this text, rather than generalizations that are so broad that they could be kind of said about many thinkers, for example, rather than just Aristotle. And the closest you can get to the text is obviously quoting it directly. Of course, given the way Aristotle writes, it's absolutely imperative that when you quote from him, so for example, you give his definition of happiness. When you quote, you must paraphrase. What does he really mean in ordinary? Think about like the Urban Dictionary. It's like the way people speak. I don't know if they speak on the street that way or whether it's just on the internet. But you have to translate Aristotle into our own way of thinking, because even as his language is somewhat foreign and his ideas are foreign, we may not agree with him. We can certainly understand what he's saying. Okay, so in terms of the substance, citation from the text is really important. And we've spent a lot of time in these lectures looking at specific passages that I am letting you know are very significant toward what he's trying to say. Length is no proof of an answer, and of course I'm asking you to stay within the bounds of 2 pages, which means 2 things. You can't just fill those up with what I just call like kind of filler, like you take a quotation for a whole paragraph. That's just, to me, that's just filler. That's not really substance. It's just kind of taking up space. And then on the other hand, I'm also asking you to say what you have to say, to answer these questions, which require, there's a lot that could be said, to compress that into 2 pages and to find a way to do it efficiently. And it means every sentence really has to get at the nub of the issue. So this also raises the issue of focusing on the question and the scope. Remember, the question spells out the scope of your writing, and scope includes the parameters, or it is the parameters or boundaries of what you're trying to say. And the key thing here is that you say everything that needs to be said, and that you don't say what does not need to be said. Because if you take time saying up with what doesn't need to be said, you're not answering the question, and then you're using up space of the 2 pages to say things that are not relevant. You're not going to have the space you need to say the things that do need to be said. So 14, just a reminder of something I've already said, which is that the only thing that you should be using as a resource are class materials. And I should also say that the videos and the PowerPoints are all there for you to work from. And the PowerPoint provides a very good skeleton. Please don't quote me. You use them as a reference point, and they're all a reference point to the text, right? The text is the Bible here. Okay, so let's move on to the questions very quickly, and we shall wrap up and be finito. Okay. In books, question number 1. So remember, there are 2 questions, 2 pages of answer for each question. And that's 4 pages of answer, and that's the test. In books 1 and 10, Aristotle explains what happiness is as he defines it, right? So first off, what is happiness for Aristotle in all its aspects? What is required or the necessary preconditions for happiness? So let's be clear, I'm not asking you your opinion. And if we were writing a different kind of essay, that would be entirely appropriate. And frankly, if we had more time and I had more time to think up this online version, we would definitely get into what we think of Aristotle's definition of happiness, because I'm sure that not everybody some people just say, I don't know about that, and other people really opinionated about it and say it's not satisfying to me, because this whole thing about human beings, the reason and all this stuff, we're a lot more than that, and there's a lot of interesting questions that have been debated about Aristotle ever since he wrote this book. So what is his understanding of happiness? And remember, some of the complications is he gives a lot of opinions from his own society that basically mirror opinions that are out there in our society. The 3 lives, those are those opinions. And we discover that some of the opinions he raises turn out to be precisely not his understanding of happiness. And you have to understand when he's talking in his voice versus just presenting the opinions of society. It's kind of almost like a sociological opinion poll. So what is happiness, and what are the preconditions, right? Focusing on books 1 and 10, explain what Aristotle means at 1.7, since happiness is activity of soul in accord with virtue, and if there are several virtues, then in accord with the best and most complete ones. So there's a whole bunch of things. If you are going to give me Aristotle's definition of happiness, you are also going to have to explain what virtue is, right? You're even going to have to touch on what some things about human nature as it plays into virtue, right? And even happiness itself is directly connected with a part of human nature. And this now goes all the way back to our discussion in the Politics, when we talked about how Aristotle understands nature in general and human nature specifically, right? What is virtue, right? And clearly this statement at 1.7, as I've talked about many times, is a very clear and in some ways, how should I say it? Maybe definitive about where Aristotle is getting, where he's going with happiness. However, it's clearly also incomplete, because he insinuates or suggests or intimates things that he does not spell out. Like, he doesn't spell out exactly what virtue is here. He doesn't spell out what the virtues are. He doesn't spell out what the best and most complete one is. That can only be discerned from reading books 1 and 10. and quite frankly, getting into a little bit of discussion of the other books where he just discusses the different types of virtue involved and so on. If happiness is connected with virtue, what is virtue? What does virtue have to do with happiness, and what role does reason play in our happiness? So here we get the connection between happiness, virtue, and reason. C. Next, if there are several virtues, what are they, and what is the best and most complete one? What does Aristotle mean by most complete? What is this virtue? What is this virtue, the best and most complete? Why is this virtue best and most complete? So when we get into questions of most complete or complete, it raises this whole specter of what does it mean for something to be complete, right? And it also raises the specter of why this particular virtue is considered best and most complete, and that's going to have to do with human nature, something about our nature. If happiness is connected with our human nature. Aristotle says that in addition to activity in accord with virtue, that in order to achieve happiness, we need to have a complete life. What does he mean by complete life? What does it consist of, and how does it relate to happiness? Okay. So A through D is really here a spelling out of question of one, when it says what is happiness and what are the preconditions, right? A through D really are just going into the nuts and bolts and breaking down that more general question. Okay. Books 8 and 9. First, what are the preconditions of any form of friendship? Now, let's just be clear. He kind of meanders through a discussion of things that turn out to be preconditions for friendship. But this concept or notion of preconditions of friendship is something I've kind of teased out of the text, and it's in various places that you can find. And essentially, without these preconditions, you either don't have any type of relationship at all, or you don't have full friendship. They're kind of basic requirements that are part of the foundation, or even the possibility of these types of relationships. What is friendship in general for Aristotle, and what are the three types of friendship in particular? So I'm asking the preconditions, then I'm asking what does Aristotle seem to think friendship is all about? And you notice, like, he gives the three types, which really do get into a substantive definition, in effect, of friendship. But outside of those three types, there's no place where he kind of gives a statement of the meaning of friendship is this, right? He doesn't really do that. He talks about really examples, and the three forms are definitely examples, but then he also talks about those are kind of categories of understanding of relationships, but then he also just talks about categories of relationships. He talks about mothers and children, mothers and fathers, families, citizens, young people, the whole variety of different relationships. And from that, you start to get an understanding of what this thing is. And you know that you start to see that there's a kind of hierarchy to it. And I will say one thing, which is that friendship consists of a certain type of relationship between people. It is not just a feeling of affection, right? Because the Greek word philia means love, right? And when we think of love, we think of emotion, very often, not exclusively. But typically, the first thing that comes to mind is an emotion. He knows emotions are involved. It's significant. But that is not what friendship is. It's not a feeling towards someone else. It's a relationship that it may involve in feelings. So then describe all the forms and their characteristics, including the good or object of exchange, whether the friend is treated as a means or an end, a true friend or not, the degree of completeness or incompleteness, issues of duration and issues of equality and inequality, like and unalike. All right, so you notice that all these friendships start with issues of a certain type of object of exchange, and then basically because of that object, When you know what the objects of exchange are, you know everything else about the relationship. You know why the people are involved in it. You know whether they're going to be alike or unalike. You know whether they're going to be more equal or less equal. You know whether the relationship's going to last a long time or not. And you actually know whether it's more complete or less complete, right? Because it's all structurally built into the object of exchange. What does it mean to treat a true friend as an end in themselves, whereas someone less than a true friend is merely a means, right? So we talked about means and ends from the beginning of the ethics, and those two things are really important for Aristotle. And the basic understanding is that ends are always superior to means. And what does that mean to treat a human being as an end? And what does it mean to treat a human being merely as a means? So the next one, what makes complete friendship complete? Now notice I am not saying what is complete friendship. I am asking what makes complete friendship complete. So the first thing you need to think about is what does it mean to be complete? And we've spent a lot of time talking about this concept of completion, going back to Aristotle's Politics and his discussion of human nature and the completion or state of completion, or something being completed, right? The polis is the complete community, right? This is a very specific technical term for Aristotle. And as we've said, when he talks about complete friendship, unlike the other two forms, he does not use the object of exchange as the basis for its name. So the other two types are based on their object of exchange. Complete friendship is not, because what's exchanged is something connected with it being complete. It is what makes it complete, but then the name is rather elusive, right? And he forces us to figure out what's being exchanged, whereas the other ones he just tells you what it is. Okay, then what is the relationship between friendship and happiness? Will all three types of friendship produce happiness? If not, which one and why? So this is not an obvious answer, in the sense that Aristotle doesn't come out and scream and say that how friendship directly contributes to happiness, although he gives us plenty of clues that can lead us in certain directions. There's kind of more than one answer to this question, but they all start to center around similar things. And then lastly, what is the relationship between the three forms of happiness, the three lives, and the three parts of the soul? So we saw that the soul has three parts, that human beings are naturally in tension with themselves because they have three motivational sources. And we saw that the three lives were really derived from the part of the soul that dominates the person who lives that life, right? So if I'm more driven by one aspect of the soul, I end up with having this life. If I'm more driven by another aspect of the soul, I tend to have this life. If I have driven by this part of the soul, and I have another life, right? And it turns out that those three parts of the soul that naturally lead into the three lives also have a virtual parallel with the three forms of that should be friendship, not happiness. So I have to do one little edit here. So how do the three parts of the soul, the three lives, and the three forms of friendship all connect up, right? An interesting and also fairly challenging question. Okay, so that pretty much wraps it up. I think that's pretty comprehensive. Remember, you've got the text at your disposal, you've got the videos that help explain those things at your disposal, and you have the study guide, you have PowerPoints, you've got a lot of materials to work from here, right? And any questions I will take via email. So please send them to me ASAP, and I encourage everybody to be working on this sooner rather than later so those questions don't come in the last minute. Great. Thank you very much.